Hi, everyone. My name is Jamie Salter, and I'm in San Diego, California, and I'm the co-author of the Self-and-Match System. I'm trained as a school psychologist and as a board-certified behavior analyst, and I've worked as both an autism specialist and administrator in special ed also in my career. And Katie, I'm going to punt it over to you to introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Katie Croce. I am also a board certified behavior analyst. I am trained as a behavior analyst and as an autism specialist. I've worked primarily in schools supporting students from kinder through 22 years old in gen ed and special ed settings. And I currently work as a faculty member at a local university here in Philadelphia. So I'm based right outside of Philadelphia. And so I'm happy for you guys to be joining us today.
And we have a very lofty agenda. We know that your time is very limited and busy. So, in the next 20 minutes, we want to make sure that you know what the self match system is. We know that you might be joining in different levels of knowing what the intervention is. So, we want to make sure that we have some common language about what self match is, how it can enhance behaviors in schools. We know that behaviors are higher than ever in schools, and we want to give you a systematic tool to support that. We are going to talk about how self-match is implemented across the tiers as both tier 1, 2, and 3. We'll talk a little bit about how you can align self-match with IEP goals to facilitate more database decision making. And we'll make sure to take some time at the end to talk about different training opportunities, 25, 26 training opportunities for your team. We will email you this recording after today's session. We will make sure we have question and answers at the end of the session. And you'll notice that throughout this PowerPoint, which we'll email to you, there's QR codes. And the reason we have QR codes kind of spattered throughout is if you want more information on any of the topics that we kind of glass over, there's further videos you can watch to learn even more about the intervention.
Yeah, so I guess a lot of you are probably here because you are struggling with students that are having challenging behavior in your schools. And that is exactly why we hope that you would come so that we could provide a little bit of help for you. So we'll tell you about the self and match system very briefly and give you some information about those professional development opportunities, as Jamie mentioned. So the self and match system is called a system because it's really a manualized self-monitoring intervention with a motivational system that is embedded within it. It is firmly grounded in the principles of behavioral science. So we've taken all of the research and really put it in layman's terms, easy to understand terms for parents, for teachers, for administrators, for behavior analysts and school psychs that might be helping to implement behavior intervention plans for students in schools. It's been implemented as part of a school-wide positive behavior support system, as well as individual systems for students in kinder through adulthood settings. So we'll give you some examples of that just shortly. It has been implemented internationally to support students in gen ed as well as special ed settings. Students that have identified special needs can utilize self and match, as well as preschool through post-secondary students who maybe just need a little bit of additional support, or as a tier 1 intervention in a class-wide setting.
And Katie, I know that's a lot of different populations, and we'll talk in just a minute how if you're implementing this intervention with a preschooler, it's going to look very, very different than if you're implementing it with a high school or an adult transition. And that's because so much of this intervention is customized based on this considerations guide that we'll point out to you. But our ultimate goal in developing this intervention is to teach students and individuals how to monitor their own behavior. We know there's so many adult-driven interventions out there, but we want to find a way to systematically teach students how to engage in more pro-social behaviors, because then they're able to better access their learning, develop stronger relationships with others, which leads to a better quality of life. And that's what it's all about for us. And we know it's what it's all about for you and your staff as well.
Yeah, and we know that when students can identify if they are engaging in the expected behavior or unexpected behavior, that's really the first step in making that behavior change. And I know, Jamie, we hear so much about people talking about wanting to hold students accountable and students being accountable for their own behavior. And this is really a way that we can help facilitate that. So as far as the self and match system goes, inside the manual that we have available, it includes a variety of different types of things. So it is not just sample forms that are in there, but we actually have a whole introduction on the research on self-monitoring and the research behind the self and match system. As Jamie already mentioned, there is a considerations guide prior to implementation, which is like your roadmap to developing your individualized systems, as well as another considerations guide that you can use when you have already started your self and match system to help you refine and refocus it There are a variety of sample forms and also some supplemental materials like data collection sheets and letters home to parents and staff training samples and social story samples. There's also access to our online portal, which has access to a lot of different types of digital resources, as well as some videos that Jamie and I have created to give you some more information about the self and match system and our self and match maker, which is a form creator. So we try to make it as easy as possible for you to create the forms that you'll be using with your students.
So there's four fundamental core elements that are at the core of every self-match system. And then as I alluded, everything else is really individualized to support the students or the clients of your program and your schools. The first core element is that systematic planning before beginning this intervention is what's going to make it an effective intervention, which is why we always go back to that roadmap. You are thinking of every what if. What are the target behaviors? What happens if we're in the middle of something when it's time to fill out the interval? What if they're refusing to fill out the self-match form? What type of rewards are going to be available? All of those things we're thinking through before we start the intervention in a very scripted, collaborative way. After that, we're looking at the fact that no one is perfect and we're not aiming for perfection. We're aiming for progress. We're looking at where are our students now and how can we help them to be the best version of themselves. And we're looking at that growth mindset in terms of how can we support them on their road to more effective behaviors in the schools or homes or community settings. The third is that while we don't talk a lot of behavioral jargon in our trainings, and we really try to pull it out of both our manual and our trainings, it is based in behavioral science. So we do encourage your attendees to be thinking about what is that function of behavior? Why is that behavior occurring? And we consider that as we're developing both this intervention and the reward options that are involved. And lastly, a fundamental element as this intervention should evolve as your students' behavior evolves. So the self-match form you put in place tomorrow is not the same self-match form you would have in place in August or September, because as a student makes progress, we're looking at ways to thin and fade the intervention so it's less and less intrusive for them.
Yeah. So as we go through our training, we really walk the attendees through this kind of step-by-step process to developing their self and match system. So we introduce you to the materials that are a part of the manual. We talk about the importance of that collaboration and identifying a team to really complete that considerations guide prior to implementation together and go through some of the things that Jamie has mentioned. And then that next step is that creation of that form. So it's not just a form, it really is this journey that you go through to create the most functional, effective intervention for the students that you're supporting. And we want to make sure, again, that we're getting the input from the team all throughout this process because they're going to have important information that's going to make the intervention more effective. We want to make sure that they understand how to systematically implement the intervention, how to teach expectations, and we'll talk about expectations in our training at length because that's really at the fundamental, that first step is really understanding if something occurs or doesn't occur, and then making sure that we are looking at that data and making changes based on the data.
So there's 5 steps involved in every self-match system, and everything else will be unique to the students. And we're about to show you some visuals of what these look like. But before we do, I want to kind of lay out these 5 steps. So on every single self-match form, your student answers the questions independently. So let's say there's questions, was I respectful, responsible, and safe? We're having our students answer those 3 questions independently first. The accountability comes in because after the students have answered the questions independently, then a staff member answers the questions independently next. Once the student has responded and the staff member has responded, we identify all the matches. Where did the student say yes and the adult say yes? Where did the student say no and the adult say no? And the reason we do that, and this is one of the cruxes that makes self-match different than other interventions, is that if a student said yes, they were engaged in the target behavior, and we agree with them, they're awarded 2 or more points. They're awarded 2 or more points because they were engaged in the target behavior and because they were able to self-reflect and identify that they were engaged in that target behavior. But if the student says no, and we say no, they're always awarded 1 point for honest self-reflection. And that's something that we find is so key in this process is you get partial credit for saying no and for identifying that you did not engage in the behavior we're looking for. But if the student says yes and we say no, that's 0 points, and then they don't get any credit for that. Sometimes at this part of our trainings, people will ask us, well, what if the student says no and we say yes? And we have a whole half-hour talk on that. No, we have about 2 minute talk, but we're not going to talk about it today. And then there's some type of reinforcement at some predetermined time based on some predetermined criteria. But what the rewards look like for your students will be different, again, if they're preschool versus high school, if they're general ed versus special ed. So all of that comes out of that considerations guide that you would fill out before implementing this intervention.
And Jamie, one other thing that I would mention here is that when Jamie and I first started working in the schools, what we were seeing was a lot of adult directed interventions where the students were not having any participation in their behavior change. And so that's where we started really focusing on learning about self-monitoring, because at the end of the day, we want our students to be as independent as possible, right? And so that is our goal with including the students to be a part of their behavior change, is that you're with yourself everywhere you go. The other thing that we saw in schools was that students were having a really hard time hearing and accepting no from their staff. And so we wanted to try to find an intervention and develop an intervention where we can teach students that no is not a bad thing. No is an opportunity to grow. And so by including the no match being worth 1 point, we are recognizing, even in moments where we have to give students correction, that we're so proud of them that they recognize that they weren't doing something that they should be doing, and how can we help them make a better choice next time. So I just wanted to highlight.
Katie, I love that you highlighted it, and it reminded me of how, so many facets of our own life we are self-monitoring with accountability partners, whether we're using weight loss apps or step counters or Fitbits or, Apple Watches. Like, there's that accountability built in, and that was something that we felt would be at the core of this intervention and has been proven over time to be such an effective tool.
Yeah. So let's look at some sample forms. You want to walk us through this one?
Sure. And this is, again, just one sample, and we're going to show you just a few at the very start today. And we have hundreds more between our trainings and our manuals and everywhere. But in this particular form, there were three target questions set up. Was I respectful? Was I flexible? Did I follow directions? And did I use good personal space? You'll notice under each one of those, there's some kind of reminders of what that means for this particular student. And that's customized based on that student's specific needs. You'll see two columns. You'll see a column called training. That's because when we do our trainings, oftentimes we'll use and model a self-match form. And then you'll see a teacher column. And so the training column, a trainee would fill in their yes or no, and then the teacher would fill in their yes or no. And we would use that code at the top where we see yes, yes is 2, no, no is 1. They're able to just fill in a yes or a no with a pen. And then at the top, left corner, you see that if they earn 14 out of the 18 points, which is 80%, they either have question and answer time or leave early. So there's 2 reward times. And the other thing, or 2 reward options for this particular form. And the other thing I'd like to point out is there's always, always, always a date on your form. And I know that's obvious for some, but as we go through today's 20 minutes together, 15 minutes together, we're going to show you how you can use each one of these questions as data for IEP progress. And if you don't have the date, you lose that data piece of things.
Yeah. So now we're going to look at a form that is basically identical to the one that we just saw, but it's modified for a learner that has more unique needs. So this is potentially a learner that is just learning some basic reading skills. And so to supplement their reading, we've incorporated pictures for each of the questions. And for each of the scheduled opportunities, we have a picture associated with each activity that they're doing during that time. The other thing that you'll notice is that instead of 3 rating opportunities, there are 5 rating opportunities here. And that's because this is a learner whose behaviors impact their learning a little bit more frequently. So if we only rated 3 times during the training period, they would most often get no's. So we want to set up the intervals that are shorter than how often the behaviors are occurring, so that we can provide the learner with more opportunities for yeses. Now, over time, we would look to fade that. But to help get started, we are going for that growth mindset and meeting our students where they're at. We want to set them up to be successful. You'll also notice instead of yeses and nos, there are smiles and frowns here. So they're responding in a different way. Maybe this is a learner that has some fine motor difficulties, and so they're just circling these responses or coloring in the circle. You'll also see that in the teacher column, there's these little boxes right in the bottom right-hand corner of each teacher response area. That's because you don't have to have any basic reading or math skills to use self and match, but we always want to expose our learners to that academic content if we can. And so this might be a learner who has some emerging math skills. And so if we have a yes match, we can write a little number 2 in here. If this is a no match, we can write a little 1. If this is a yes match, we can write a 2 to help supplement those math skills. So we can say 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 2 is 5, and then write the number of points here. And now that might be a little bit too complex for some of our learners as well. So in addition, we also have at the top 5 or 6 points equals a star. Anytime they get 5 or 6 points, we write a star in this column. We can also circle a star up the top so that they can see they're getting closer and closer to their goal. So these are just a couple of different modifications that you can make for students that are maybe more unique learners.
Yeah, and Katie, what's so neat is this is an intervention that's used both in an individual IEP, this is a tier 3 intervention, all the way to a tier 1 intervention. And this form, and then Katie, if you can hop to the next form, these are both forms that are being used in general ed classes class-wide. And so kind of on the next slide, we talk about how these really are a tool that you can use whether you're using it for a whole class of general ed students or you're using it in a self-contained special education setting.
So when we're looking at self-monitoring behaviors in schools, the things that are the really great takeaways with self-monitoring is that it really promotes that independence that we were looking for, placing the responsibility on the individual instead of an external source, getting them to be an active participant in that behavior change. One of the other things that we love about self-monitoring is that it can be used with individuals with various levels of intellectual functioning. So sometimes Jamie and I get questions about, well, I have a student that has an intellectual disability, so maybe self-monitoring might not be the intervention for them. But actually, the research shows that individuals with intellectual disabilities can learn how to self-monitor. Even preschool students can learn how to self-monitor. So it's all in the way that you design the intervention, and that comes out of that considerations guide that we talked to you about. We know that it can also be used to decrease that disruptive behavior that we see in school, but also increase classroom performance, academic skills, social skills, organizational skills, executive functioning skills. All of those things we can utilize to be enhanced using self-monitoring. We also know the research shows that it has high teacher acceptability, and that's something that is super important because we want to bring interventions to the table that teachers are likely to use. We can have the best design intervention, but if it sits on the shelf, it's not going to be effective. So we want to put interventions in teachers' hands that they want to use. And as you've seen through those couple of examples that we've shown you so far, it can be extremely individualized. And we also know that the research shows that if we include that social accountability component, that match component that we've included in our self and match system, it supplements the intervention and actually enhances the behavior change and maintains the behavior change long term.
And Katie just kind of walked through that general the research regarding self-monitoring, which I think is huge. And we're very, very fortunate that researchers have been researching self and match system in general. And we're finding some themes in the research, which is there are both student benefits as well as staff benefits to this type of intervention. And we've talked through a lot of these, and you can read through them more as we email you the slides later, but there's so many benefits. One question we get from people is, well, what's the difference between the manual and the e-manual? And what should I get my staff if I'm planning a training? And it really depends on you and your school district and what your needs are. We have found that each individual having their own manual is what makes this intervention successful because there's so many resources you're going back to on a daily basis. If you're purchasing the print manual, that's our most common access resource. There are bulk discounts available if we're doing a large training for your school district or your team. That includes all of those introductory materials and considerations guide that Katie mentioned, as well as online access to the portal and the Self and Matchmaker. And we have optional coffee chats that you can sign up for as well. The e-manual comes with everything in the manual, but is supplemental if you want the online access and the Self and Matchmaker. So there's two different options available for you and your team, depending on what's a better fit.
Yep. So prior to developing that self and match system, this is a little preview of what that considerations guide looks like, or that roadmap. It typically takes anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to complete. And as we've already mentioned, we really encourage that collaboration to be a part of the development of any intervention so that we can really be thinking holistically about all of the needs that our clients and students have.
Yeah, and as we've alluded, there's so many different ways to make the forms because we want to make it as easy and user friendly for your team. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of the digital self-match maker, which is just one of the ways you can do it. So once you go into that forms portal, you'll see both access to the digital self-match form as well as all of those additional resources that Katie told you about a minute ago. All of this is something that we talk through in more detail through this QR code. So if you want to watch a video talking about the online portal, there's a video for that. Katie, there's a video for the next one. You want to talk us through
Yeah,
that for
so
a
this is
second?
that self-and-match maker. So that's that tool that you can use to kind of automatically make the self-and-match forms that you are looking for after you've gone through that considerations guide. So we have a little tutorial on that as well. And additionally, Jamie.
Yeah, so this is one of the biggest crux for many of you here. You're like, what do I do next year for my team in terms of training? And there's so many different trainings that we encourage you to scan this QR code to read a description of every single training we offer, and also reach out and we can customize trainings to meet your team's needs. We have a full intro to self-match training, which is typically 2.5 to 3 hours. However, it can be longer for your team. We actually have an intro coming up next week or a couple weeks from now if you want to send any of your staff to that one to preview it. We have intermediate trainings, advanced trainings, paraprofessional trainings, parent trainings. We do more generic, what is self-monitoring trainings or setting up your classroom for success trainings. We love to train at different statewide and international conferences. So this will really talk you through all the different trainings that we offer. And you can set up a short Zoom with us when you get this later and you look through your QR code. This will take you right to a place where we can set up a time to talk to you more about custom trainings for your own team.
Yeah, and if you wanted to learn a little bit more about the research behind Self and Match, this is a place where you can refer back to or refer anybody on your team to.
And we only got to talk to you for about 20 minutes today. And if you're not sick of hearing from us, you can watch a recent podcast we did with Nat on behavioral observations. And we talked for about an hour about this passion. So we welcome you to look at that if you want more details. We are going to pause in about a second to make sure we have time to answer any questions that have come up in the chat. But we want you to know we're always available. We like to joke, I live in California and I'm a night owl, and Katie lives in Pennsylvania and she is an early riser. So please don't hesitate to email us. Our email is on this next slide. It's team@selfandmatch.com. Visit our website or connect with us through social media. We're kind of always around. So I am going to make sure that we pause because we are right at that 20-minute mark and see if there's any questions that you have about either the intervention or about training opportunities. And you can put those in the chat. And then if not, we'll be sure to send you this video as well as the slides, and you can always reach out another day. I'm going to stop the recording. Also, if anyone wanted to come on and actually talk with us in the chat, all you have to do is write the word panelist, and I can make you a panelist, and then you can turn on your screen and we can have a discussion. Have a great day and stay with us if you have questions.